Welcome to the Tepper School of Business Multimedia Series. For more information on the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, please visit us at www.tepper.cmu.edu/multimedia. And now, here's your selected video.
Today we are thrilled and honored to have Mr. Bill Weldon, Chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, here to speak to us. And the last, but certainly not least, Mellon Speaker Series, co-sponsored by the Biopharma and Marketing with us. Mr. Weldon has had a very successful career at Johnson & Johnson to date, having joined the company back in 1971 in the sales and marketing division of Mellon Pharmaceuticals. Since that time, he's had a variety of leadership roles, including as worldwide franchise chairman of Epigona Endosurgery and franchise chairman of the pharmaceutical sector. Outside of Johnson & Johnson, Mr. Weldon is involved in a variety of activities, among them as on the board of directors of JP Morgan, as the chair of the CEO Roundtable on Cancer, as well as on the vice chair of the Business Council. He's also on the board of trustees of his alma mater, Quinnipiac University. Johnson & Johnson, as you know, is one of the leading companies in the consumer, pharmaceutical, and medical device spaces. But it's also very well known for its credo, something that a number of us had the pleasure of hearing Mr. Weldon speak about this past summer in various leadership development programs. Mr. Weldon is also himself a fantastic leader, and we are thrilled to have him talk about leadership with us today. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bill Weldon.
Okay, now I have a question for you. How many of you were born in 1971? Or alive then? Okay, we got a couple of people here that were alive in 1971. But that's how long I've been around, so you can tell I'm an really old timer. I want to do a couple things today. First of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about J&J. Second of all, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about leadership and leadership at Johnson & Johnson and how we perceive it. And then I'd like to answer your questions, because I think it would be, the most important thing would be to answer questions, anything that's on your mind about J&J or what we do. And I hope if you have any metal in you, I hope it's a J&J product. But I have, we've got one fellow up here with two J&J knees. I have one and a bunch of other things in my back. So, you know, it's really important what's going on in science today. That's who I am. I know who I am. J&J is over 100 years old. It was started in 1886. And it really was started looking at technology and sterile bandages and for basically trying to eliminate what's the word I'm looking for? You guys know? Infections. Was actually set up as a company. It was looking at trying to eliminate infections, sterile bandages, and going into really servicing during the war period. We have a global presence. Right now, we have about 250 companies around the world. We have about 120,000 employees. We're any place in the world you want to go, you look at Johnson & Johnson, and we're represented in those areas. We talked about our credo a minute ago, and this is really the heart and soul of Johnson & Johnson. When you think about Johnson & Johnson, there are three responsibilities, and this was a document that was written when we went public about 60 years ago. And it really says we have three responsibilities. The first one is to the people that we serve. And that could be with our consumer products companies, our medical device companies, or our pharmaceutical companies. Our first responsibility is to the people that use our products, the men and women and mothers and fathers who use the products. The second responsibility we have is to our employees. And it says that basically people should be treated with dignity and respect. They should be given good working conditions, treated fairly in compensation and recognition. The third responsibility we have is to the communities in which we live and work. And one of the hallmarks of J&J is we give about 4% of our net income back in philanthropic activities. Most companies our size, we're a $65 billion corporation. Most companies our size give about 1%, usually less than 1%. But more importantly is not what we give financially in goods and services from the organization, it's what the people do. 80% of the people who work at J&J are involved in some type of philanthropic volunteer activity. Most companies have about 20%. And it's the things that are done by the people of J&J that are truly extraordinary that really help us to become a leader when you look at us in many of the areas of reputation and philanthropy. And the last responsibility we have, and each one of the paragraphs of our credo starts with our responsibility is, and it's to our shareholders. And it says the people that invest in us should get a fair return. It doesn't say the best return. It says they should get a fair return. And if you look at the history of J&J against almost any other company, it's been in the S&P or the Dow for the period of time we've been there, very few have yielded the same types of returns we've seen over this period of time. The one thing that's interesting about this is, and I think it's something that as you all move into business and everything else that you think about, is it creates an argument, a discussion, and a debate. Because each one of these almost cause conflict with the other one. So if you're talking about returning more money to shareholders, somebody could be saying we should be doing less in philanthropy. If you want to do more in philanthropy, sometimes it takes something away from what we do for employees. Everything conflicts. So you have basically what it allows us to do is have the opportunity to have a debate. And I think as you go into business or go into whatever career you may choose to go into, it's very important that you have these types of debates, that you look at things in ways of what is best, most importantly for the people you're in business to serve, but everything else causes a debate and a question. And I think that's one of the most healthiest things about our credo. We came up with this a couple of years ago. We used to say we're the most diverse, largest healthcare company in the world and all these things, but it really didn't mean a lot. So we spent some time with our consumer people to really look at how should we describe J&J, and we really came up with this statement, caring for the world one person at a time. That's what we do. Every place you go, we touch 1 billion lives every day. 1 billion people are touched around the world with J&J products, whether it's with Neutrogena or Aveeno, or whether it's with our pharmaceutical products or our medical device products. We touch over 1 billion people every day, and we care for them one person at a time. Everybody has a different need and a different expectation, and it's very important that we recognize that, and we're research-driven. If you look at the way our business is broken down, our largest segment is in the medical device and diagnostics business, which is about 40% of our business. And these are operational growth rates, growing at about 1.7%, just under 2%. If you look at in reported growth, it would be about 4.5%. You look at our pharmaceutical, and that's about $25 billion, $26 billion. If you look at our pharmaceutical business, it's about 37%. Pharmaceuticals used to be the largest part of it, but in the last few years, we've lost 2 major products, Risperdal and Topamax, which were both, they account for about $7 or $8 billion worth of revenue that went into, they lost their patent, had patent expirations, and so we lost the volume of those. But the business was growing at 6% last year operationally, about 8.5% if you look at it in total growth. And our consumer business, which makes up about 23% of J&J, which is the business most people think of when you think of J&J, whether it's baby powder or Band-Aids, Neutrogena, Aveeno, Tylenol, the McNeil products. That's what most people think about, but it's truly the smallest portion of our business. It makes up 23%, and you can see it had negative growth last year. If you put currency in there, it grew a little over 2%. The reason we had that problem is a couple years ago, we had a very painful lesson that we learned, and that was we had some quality control and manufacturing issues that we had to deal with our McNeil products. And that was mostly our Tylenol and Motrin were the major products that were affected by some manufacturing issues that we had. We made a conscious decision when we had these problems to shut down one of our major facilities and to basically gut the whole facility, put $100 million into it, and to basically bring it up to the speed that it should have been at to be able to get the standards we wanted to. And if you want to talk about that in a minute, we can. When you look at leadership, and you can look at all these standard things. You set a strategy, you have a vision, you inspire people, you do all these things. But the reality of leadership is that you work for everyone else. No one works for you. If you think about leaders, what are they doing? They're always working for someone else, developing them, helping them, mentoring them, putting compensation programs together for them. That's real leadership, is when you are realized that you're trying to help others and nobody's working for you. I was interviewed once in CNBC, and I said that the best way you can describe a leader is that anything that goes wrong in an organization, you accept responsibility for. And anything that goes right, you give to someone else. It's the best way you can establish yourself as a leader, is recognizing that everything you're doing is for someone else. And you should really highlight the people and the successes and take responsibility for the failures And if there are problems, you take those responsibilities. You don't become Teflon and try and blame them on someone else. You own up to them. And I can tell you, we all make mistakes. One of the problems I see in the world and business today is because of the economic environment, the macroeconomic environment around the world. People have become risk averse, afraid to make decisions, afraid to go out and do things, and afraid that they're going to make a mistake. If you don't make mistakes, you will never succeed. You have to make mistakes, which means you're going to take some risks, recognize the upside and the downside to the risk. Everybody looks at it and says there's a great upside to it, but you have to also acknowledge the downside. And you have to make sure that you understand that you're taking a calculated risk and you want to move forward. But you can't not take risks, or you will never be successful. You have to step up and say, I'm going to do something. You have to make sure you have the facts behind you, and then you go ahead and make a decision. But you realize that you work for everyone else. At J&J, we expect our leaders to grow the business, and this is very important, not only financially, but also in the ethics and values that are embodied in our credo. It's not just getting the business, it's how you get the business. We will walk away from countries where there's so much graft and corruption that that's the way you do business. We don't do business in those countries. We always say, if you do something that will violate our credo, there is no tolerance, you will be terminated. If you miss your numbers, that's okay. There are reasons why we miss numbers. Certain events can happen. If you look at the pharmaceutical business, a product could run into problems. You look at the macroeconomic environment. You look at countries that are, having challenges today. There's lots of reasons why you may miss your forecast, but there's no reason why you would compromise the reputation of the corporation by making a mistake. And we put together a leadership model years ago, and we used to have it as a yin and a yang. It was the first recommendation. The yin and the yang were credo values and financial results. And very quickly we said, no, it's credo values is the bullseye, and financial results come around it. You live with your reputation, you live with things that are important. And once you compromise that, you are compromising the corporation, and it's very hard to recover from that. Financially, you can recover, you can come back. But when you hurt your reputation, you've really damaged yourself. We have a leadership initiative, and we really look at it basically the same way I said. You have to understand your customer. You have to drive for performance. You have to deliver financial results. You have to connect with people. This is a model that we put together, and it says these are the 4 things that we look at for our leadership as we move forward into J&J. And it says on the bottom of it, I don't know if you can see it on the bottom here, it says leadership imperatives have to be driven by credo values. So again, we want to stress the values in accomplishing things. And what you will find is that your customers will support you if you stay true to your values. If you don't, you'll find you'll have problems. This is the model that we use for J&J. It's how we look at our business, and it's also how we develop leaders. And it starts with our credo. As I said, that you can look at as the umbrella or the foundation of J&J. Again, it's about the people we serve. It's about the employees. The third, and these are in order of importance: people we serve, employees, communities, and shareholders. And we get benchmarked all the time about our credo. People come in and say, well, we have the same, but we put shareholder first. Well, if you put shareholder first, you compromise everything else. The people you serve are the most important people you have to deal with. The second thing we have up here is our operating model, and we've used this for a long time. And it is something we debate. We debate our credo. We have credo challenges all the time. And for over 60 years now, we've never changed it. When we look at our operating model, we say, is this the right thing to be doing? Being broadly based in human health care. You look at medical devices, diagnostics, you look at drugs, and you look at consumer products. And many people say, is that too diverse? If you look at the healthcare industry, companies have broken themselves up that have been like J&J. Then they've gone back together again. Probably, I think it was about 5-6 years ago, we bought Pfizer's consumer healthcare business. And then they just bought Wyeth and said, we wish we were in the consumer healthcare business. People and companies go with the whim of what's happening. They'll divest their medical device business when their medical devices and drugs Abbott right now is breaking itself up. Many companies are doing that. The one thing that we've said is we want to stay true to who we believe we are. We think there's tremendous convergence between the businesses. Our dermatology business that we had years ago when we were the top derm company in the world, we moved over completely from our farm business to our consumer business. And that's why we came up with the naturals with Aveeno and Neutrogena and things like this. We put the scientists that were on one side to the other side because we didn't see technology that was going to make advances in the dermatology area other than a drug called itraconazole beyond that, which is a drug we had. So we moved the group over. We moved people between the different groups. Right now we're looking at, if you look at a hip or a knee implant, infections can be a problem. So now we want to try and incorporate drugs into the stems of these products so you eliminate the potential risk for infections. We have a product coming out called the Fibrin Pad, where we've taken the biomaterials people and the biologics people, putting materials management and biologics together to be able to stem one of the largest problems for death today in the emergency room is bleeding out. You can take a product like this, hold it on, you can puncture an aorta, hold it on it for, I think it's 2 minutes, and you can stop any bleeding any place. A lot of work with the government for the battlefield and things like that. But it's the convergence of these different groups working together. The question always comes, can you become too large? We had this debate at JP Morgan the other day, the board meeting, and Lee Raymond, who is the CEO of Exxon, and myself and other people are on that board, and we said, all right, can you be too big? And the answer is probably yes, if you're dealing with automobiles and drugs. But if you're dealing with drugs and consumer products and devices, all which interrelate, then probably not. As long as there's a relationship between the size of the organization. It used to be believed 20 years ago that $20 billion was too big. It's not as long as companies are close and interrelated. But you have to stay true to what your strategy is. We believe being broadly based in healthcare is what's really important, and we're not changing that. In time, it may change, but you have to believe in your strategy and have the facts to support it. Managing for the long term. During the economic crisis we've had, during 2 patent expirations, during the McNeil challenges, we still spend $7.5 to $8 billion a year in R&D. And we will continue to spend $7.5 to $8 billion in R&D because R&D is the future. And you have to manage not only to deliver today's results, but you have to make sure you're managing for the long-term health of the business. And that means 2 things, investing in R&D and also investing in people. We spend more every year than we spent the previous year in the development of our people. That is the whole future of any organization, the amount of money you're willing to invest in the people in your organization to develop them, because they're the ones that make everything else work. If I said we spend $7.5 billion a year in R&D, in addition to that, any licenses, acquisitions that we make, we're about to consummate a deal to buy a company called Synthes, which is an orthopedic company out of Switzerland for $20 billion. That's on top of the R&D dollars we spend. So you have to make sure that you're protecting not only today, but you're looking at the future. And there's a lot of pressure from the financial markets today not to do that. They're looking for short-term returns. But again, you have to stay true to what you believe in, and innovation is what drives the healthcare industry, and we have to spend that kind of money. And sometimes we get criticized for it. There's actually one financial group that said to me, we'd rather you not buy Synthes and pay it back to us in dividends. We said, well, that's fine, we're not going to do it. But you have to realize that sometimes there are pressures that you just have to not accept and you have to deal with. The third one is decentralized management, and that to me is kind of the magic around J&J. I said before, we have about 250 operating companies. The people that are most important in J&J are the 250 people that run those companies. They're the people that day in, day out have to run the companies and deliver the results. And there's no better training grounds and development of leaders than being able to go into those businesses. Now, about 3 years ago, we had manufacturing issues that I talked about a minute ago where we were challenged. And they said, is decentralization a problem at J&J because you have these manufacturing issues? At the time, we had 120 manufacturing facilities around the world. We went out and looked at them all. And we had problems in 3 facilities, all run by the same management team. We deduced that it wasn't decentralization. It was a group that was being managed by one group, and we replaced that group. If we had 117 facilities that had problems, it would have been decentralization and getting too far away from managing the business. But it's the confidence you have to have in the people that you allow to run your businesses and to take care of it day to day, day in, day out. You have to have that type of confidence. J&J is probably the single biggest example you'll ever see of decentralized management. We allow those people to make the decisions, and we're all guided by our credo. So that is really the most important part of the magic around J&J. Is you start in one organization, in a small business, you can move to a larger business, you can move any place in the world, you can move between drugs, devices, diagnostics, and pharmaceuticals, and you can move all around, and you can learn and grow in an organization. And that's what, to me, is so critically important, is allowing people to experience different things, allowing people to take risks, to make decisions, and to make mistakes. And it's much better to make a mistake. First company I ran was probably $40 million. Much better for me to make a mistake there than to make a mistake at $65 billion. So you learn, you make mistakes. You have to make those mistakes. If you don't, you're not going to learn, and then you're going to have problems when you get further along. And then the whole thing on focus on people and values. As I said before, it's the values and the people that are so critically important. They make everything happen. If you compromise the values of J&J or any company, you pay for that for a long time. It takes decades to get a reputation. It takes one mistake to ruin it. And it can happen any place in the world. We spend, I'm going to say, an inordinate amount of time spending time with our management to ensuring they understand what we expect of J&J management and the values we expect. And as you travel around the world, we turned ourselves in probably, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago, on foreign corruption. We identified an issue in a small country outside of the United States. Our internal audit group did. And it was a small amount of money in a company that was a small amount of money that nobody would have ever found. Nobody would have ever known about it except we knew about it. And we said, do we turn ourselves in or not to the DOJ? We made a conscious decision to turn ourselves in, even though we knew nobody would ever identify this problem. And we did it because how could I look anybody in the eye at J&J and says, you make a mistake, you get fired, we find something that needs to be addressed, and we don't turn ourselves in. So we turned ourselves in. It cost us a lot of money, gave us a lot of angst, but it was the right thing to do. And an interesting story about that is right before, the week before this happened, we'd been given one of these big awards from the CNBC, which has these, they're almost like Oscars for the business. It was because of our business practices. And then the next week we turned ourselves in for foreign corruption. They had, and needless to say, they said, God, look what we gave them last week, and now look at what's happening. But then the next comment was, but what else would you have expected that from a company like J&J? And we actually benefited by an issue. Now, if that became routine, it would be a real problem. But we then went around the world and talked to all of our leadership. We've done it for 3 years now. Talked to everybody who becomes a leader in a room like this. We'll talk about anything. We tell people what's expected. Because that's what is critical and actually so critical to companies. Once a year, we have an executive committee that's basically 6 people. It's myself, our 2 vice chairmen, our CFO, our general counsel, and our head of HR. And we get together once a year and determine what are the priorities for the coming year. And it could be that they're the same the next year for a couple or 3 years. And that's what the next green portion of this slide says. It's sustainable, compliant growth. That's what the objective is right now for this year. And the enablers of that are high-quality, innovative products, strong pipeline, the global presence, and talented people. The people side is the one common thread between our credo, our operating model, and our priorities, is people, people, and people. But you need to make sure you do it right. And we used to have it that it was growth, and we changed it to compliant growth because of the corruption issue we had. We put it into high-quality products because of the issues we had in some quality. So we wanted to make sure we stress these. But basically, if you look at this is the way we run J&J, this is a very simple model. There's not a lot of complexity here, but that's how we run it, and that's how we develop people, and we ask people to make sure they honor this and honor our credo. So I think I want to just leave you with one last thing to keep in mind in leadership, and that is you look for opportunities to lead. You really need to look for opportunities to stand up. It's easy to get lost in the crowd. It's easy not to take on the responsibility. But you really see, when you sit around a table, you can see who wants to take a leadership role, who wants to stand up and be heard, who wants to be accountable. The second thing is crisis defines leadership. Whenever you have a crisis, you're going to see who's going to rise to the top. If you're in the middle of a crisis, you want to make sure that you are thinking things through and logically moving forward and not getting angry. Somebody once gave me, I have a very short fuse. So once somebody gave me a thing that said, whom the gods would destroy, they make angry first. So you have to learn to control yourself and not get angry and make sure that you are thinking logically through everything, because you watch people who get angry and they usually do themselves a disservice. The next thing is you'll spend most of your life in the gray area. This is really interesting. I have this debate with our legal people all the time. There's black and white, especially in the healthcare industry. You know, when you're dealing with the FDA and the regulatory bodies and all these areas where we're getting more and more heavily regulated, about 20% is black and white, legal and illegal. About 80% of your life is spent in the gray area. And you have to ask yourself the question, how far close to the black do you want to go? We always say, if your family reads about you in the newspaper, you're going to be proud of the decision you made. And if you're not, you probably shouldn't make it. Many times people will come and say, well, this other company did this. And we say, well, that's fine. That's another company. We're not necessarily going to do it. So it's how far do you want to push the gray area? It can be legally correct, but morally and ethically, it may not be the right thing to be doing. So you have to ask yourself those questions, because most of the time, they're not easy questions when you get into leadership roles. You get the questions that nobody else really wants to answer. You got to be proud of the decisions you make, and you got to have the courage to make them. You have to be able to get the facts. You got to be able to analyze the situation. Everybody else may be going this way, and the facts may tell you to go this way. Don't be afraid to go this way. If you have the facts, you don't have to follow the team. You don't have to follow everything that's going on this way. You want to make sure you have the facts, you have a defensible position, and then have the courage to stand up and go against the tide. You have to be willing to do that. So I think that's all that I really wanted to say about J&J, about leadership, and now I'd like to just answer whatever questions you all may have. So I hope you have some questions. Go ahead.
I'm Matt Flores, second year. Thank you for coming. I have a question regarding when you acquire a company, the cultures are obviously different. How do you incentivize or ensure that acquired company to adhere to your values?
Yeah, it's something that we've learned really hard lessons over time, because we used to acquire companies. We do a lot of due diligence, a tremendous amount of due diligence. One of the things that is a criteria for us to acquire a company is that the cultures do mix. We do look at the culture, and we've walked away from companies where cultures have been so different that it's never going to work. What you do is, at one point we used to buy a company and then we Johnson & Johnsonize them. We go in and take them over and just kind of make them like us. And the reason they were successful is because they were like them, not like us. So what we learned over time is that there are certain things that need to be required. Okay, the culture is the first one. You have compliance and regulatory issues, which have to be adhered to, and financials, which comes into regulatory. So what we try and do is make sure that we're going in and helping people understand our credo, our values, and our responsibilities. We then make sure that we look at their compliance and our compliance and make sure that we're working together to either improve ourselves or improve them. We make sure that the manufacturing, regulatory, quality, and all those are up to certain standards, and the financial reporting is there. Beyond that, it can be a gradual process. But we're not going to allow a company that we acquire, and And you find this with a lot of small companies. They want to kind of cut corners because they don't have the financial wherewithal in clinical trials or something like that. And they may have done things that would not be acceptable, and that's okay, that happens. And it's not that they're doing anything really wrong, it's just that, you know, it's not the way we would do it. So we would go in and change and modify some of that. But we want to make sure that they're adhering to the same standards that we want them to adhere to in the areas that are really important. And then they're very successful because of their R&D, they're very successful because of their marketing programs and other things. And gradually we move. And the best example I think we have of a company got integrated into J&J is in 1999 we bought a company called Centocor. Centocor is one of the top biotech companies, and their leadership ultimately became, our CFO today came from Centocor, the person that ran our farm business came from Centocor, who's now retired, and we rotated our people into Centocor, and we've had a huge benefit from movement of people back and forth. And I think over time, it's the best way to integrate is to move people to the two different groups. But there are certain standards that you have to expect, that you go in and you have to make sure that we're all living up to an acceptable standard, and if not, you have to change it. Okay? What else? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tony Charan. I'm a second-year healthcare policy and management student at Mellon College. I was just curious, in the next 10 years, what are sort of maybe the 3 main priorities or objectives that Johnson & Johnson have?
I think if you were to look out over the next 10 years, you know, the first one, if you look at priorities and objectives, it has to be to develop people. If you look at the rate of change of technology and science today, we have to make sure that we're staying up with that or ahead of it. And the curve is the trajectory is so quick right now, it's very hard to be able to stay up there. So it's all about people, development of people, and moving forward. And that comes into innovation and innovating for our industry and developing people. So I would say people and innovation are the top 2 priorities that you have to have. And then the third one has to be the whole regulatory, legislative, environmental issues. Because, and when I say environmental, you can talk about sustainability, which would probably be next, but what I mean by environmental here is that you have a regulatory environment that is changing very quickly. You have pressures from the macroeconomic environment that's happening, and you have to be able to adapt your business to those areas. So it's kind of a government affairs and innovation all around people. And I think that the fourth one that I would put in there is sustainability and making sure that we are contributing to continuing to improve the environment. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jorge Carvalho, first-year student here. And you mentioned that J&J will walk away from corrupted markets. But has there been a case where actually the presence of J&J in these corrupted markets has actually helped fight that corruption in the market?
I think there are areas. There was a meeting that was just held called the Apex meetings out in Hawaii, where 21 member countries got together. And J&J helped spearhead a code of compliance for healthcare that we would all live up to. And the 2 policy writers were the Mexican government and the Malaysian government that underwrote the program. We got 21 companies to sign up to it. Apex next year, it's a meeting that's held every year. Apex next year will be held in Russia. And I was at the Asia Society giving a presentation 6 months ago, 8 months ago. And there was a person who's coming in to talk about Russia and what they're going to do. It was the Russian people. And one of the questions I asked is, are you going to adhere to the policies and programs that we've put in place for basically corruption and anti-corruption? And I was approached by a very large man afterwards who said, yes, we are. And I said, good, I'm glad. but really, I mean, there are ways that I think we all have to try and help change for the better. And there are some where it just does not, the environment does not allow it to happen. And there are countries where the healthcare people make 100% of their income through graft and corruption. We're not going to be involved in those countries. There are other countries where, and as we went around the world after we talked about the foreign corruption issues we had, a person who's high up in the company who I know well said, Bill, you know, and I've lived in Asia and Europe, so, you know, I've lived in lots of different societies. And he said, Bill, you know, the environment that I come from, if we want to get a driver's license, we bribe somebody and get it. And I mean, there are some countries where you do that. I mean, when I lived in Asia, you know, you got certain things through exchange, let's call it. But the reality was, and I said to Pericles, I said, you know, Pericles, I said, that's fine. I said, so if you want to get your driver's license, you can pay for it. If you want to get J&J business, you don't. So I think we can help change things. And I think as many of the economies that work on a different standard than we do, and they wouldn't call it corruption. They would say they work on a different standard, and it's something they've lived on. I think that we can help them, and they can help us realize that there's, you know, a proper way, especially when I think of healthcare, but you can think of anything else. You want people using products because they're the right products to use. So I think we can help influence by working in those areas, by not compromising our values and our beliefs. And I think we can bring about change. And it's not just J&J, it's many other companies that are actually subscribing to the same thing. And I think as more and more companies subscribe to a compliant way of doing business, I think it will influence and affect the way business is done in many parts of the world. Yeah.
Thank you for coming to the Tepper School.
Sure.
My name is Sunday. I'm finishing my first year. And my question for you is, can you tell us about a time when you made a mistake and how you recovered and what lessons you learned?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I've made so many mistakes that, you know, you don't even know where to start. You know, I can tell you, you know, you could go right down the list. The biggest mistakes I make are when you work with people, and you'll find that I believe people is what it's all about, okay? So it's when I put somebody in a job and they fail. And it's usually because I made and I look at it that I made a bad decision. I couldn't motivate them. Something didn't work, and I made the choice to put them in the job and they failed. So I always reflect upon what can I learn and how can I benefit from those mistakes. I could tell you some acquisitions where we bought companies. There are some companies that I could say we bought and then sold because they didn't materialize, and I could sit here and tell you that we were just ahead of the technology was ahead of the times and that it was going to work out, and then there's others that just didn't work. So you know, you look at every one of these and you say, what could I have done differently? The biggest one, if I look back on my whole career, is over the last couple of years when we've had the quality control issues in some of the McNeil facilities and some of the other facilities that we've dealt with. You know, everybody would say, you know, when you run a company and you've got 5 layers between you, or probably 15 layers between you and a facility, you know, should you ever have to have insight into that? It's the confidence in the people that work for you. But yet I'm accountable for that. So I've asked myself many times, what could I have done differently? Ajit and I have talked about this numerous times. What could I have done differently? How could I have been aware of what was going on? Where did I let the company down? And you know, you realize that there's things you could do differently. In this instance, we actually modified our whole reporting relationship of our quality and manufacturing groups, and we put them under an individual, which happened to be Ajit, who just retired recently, who's a graduate from here, and on the board of trustees, I guess, also. But we put it all together under Ajit reporting directly into me. Should we have done that sooner? A year before that, we had started to do a review of all of our operations and our manufacturing to see if there were changes that were necessary. You know, did I act too slowly? Should I have been on top of it before? You know, every time something happens, I think, you know, I always look at myself and I say, what could I have done differently? The biggest one are people. I mean, everything that you have to track things to, it deals with people. And you know, you have to have confidence in the people who work for you. If you don't, then you have to either develop it or you have to change it. And then you hopefully can make the right decisions. But I would say, you know, I'd say there's acquisitions I could come back to. There's people issues, and then the whole operations area and the manufacturing area. What could I have done differently where I could have changed things? Are 3 major mistakes that I make. But you learn from them, you benefit from them, and then you move on. We had one of our vice chairmen that something happened to not too terribly long ago, and I said to him, I said, you know, Alex, you need to get angry, and then you need to get over it, and you need to move on. Because you can get angry over certain things. You need to move beyond it, and then you just got to get on with your life and do what you got to do. Okay? What else? Yeah.
I was curious, you mentioned early on, by the way, I'm Carla Val, first year MBA student. You talked about how you're able to combine people from different areas of the businesses in order to create new and innovative products. I was wondering how that blends in with the decentralized management, like who's able to identify those opportunities since most people are in their own particular areas.
Yeah, there's a few things that you find that are challenges in decentralized businesses. One is you have a higher infrastructure cost. You just have one hierarchy, then you don't have 250 operating companies with their own boards and everything else. So you have a higher cost. The other thing is, how do you develop better communication across the organization, right? So we try and create an environment that allows people to get together. So if you look at our oncology groups, we have oncology, very active oncology group in our pharmaceutical business. You have surgical interventions in our medical device business, and then you have sunscreens and different things and skin care in the consumer business. So we try and get the oncology groups together, and the biotechnology people are doing a tremendous amount of work. So you try and get the groups together to be able to share what they're doing, think about what they're doing, and then they create ways to work together. It's almost impossible to force groups at J&J to say, we want you two to work together, because they'll never work together. If we get them together and they say, God, there's a great opportunity, we ought to work together, then they'll do that. And you know, you can look at so many things that have come out of J&J, the drug-eluting stents for cardiovascular disease. They came out of getting engineers and biologists and chemists together to say, hey, wouldn't it be good if we put a rejection drug on a stent to be able to put it into, you know, the cardiac area or the aorta? Or then you look at the ability to take, and we've had great failures in this area too. I'll give you a great failure. We had a product called Duragesic, which was a high-potent narcotic, fentanyl, put into a patch that you can put on your body, and it will actually be absorbed over time and eliminate pain without many of the addictive properties that narcotics have. Well, and that was usually successful, multi-billion dollars. It's off patent now. Then we developed a delivery with a battery in it for larger molecules, put in a patch, you hit the battery and it drives a molecule through the skin. And you could use that to replace PCA pumps. Anybody that's been operated on, you used to carry these morphine pumps around with you. You had to walk any place. This would just be something this size you put on your chest and you just hit a battery. And we couldn't get, one of the most important things with narcotics is we couldn't get it to shut down. So you hit it, and if it shorted, it would keep delivering narcotics, and then you'd have problems. Now, we have some of the best engineers in the world, and we have some of the best biologists and chemists in the world. Well, the biologists and chemists wanted to figure out how to do this, and they didn't want to talk to the engineers. They said, we can figure it out. Well, most of you guys know if you put a battery in water, it probably doesn't work real well. Okay, now, maybe biologists and chemists don't know that, but engineers really do know that, right? So they had to talk to them. They could have figured the problem out. And we didn't figure the problem out, and it cost us multi-billion-dollar product because we just never got to the point of figuring it out. By the time we did, we had to redo the clinical trials, and we found we should have had two separate components, put them together. When you put it on, eliminate the problem. It was too late. So we have to create the environment to allow people to get together. Now, other things that we do is we create groups where we have R&D groups that look across the organization to see what skills are needed. So we have a person who runs our R&D organization in the pharmaceutical group who runs the R&D council. We have, in the operations area, we have people now where we brought them together. And just to give you one simple learning of in decentralization, one of the biggest problems we had with the manufacturing was we had this smell and basically an aroma in some of our products, Tylenol products, and we couldn't figure out what it came from. So we did a bunch of work, and we found out that if you have packaging material on a wooden pallet that's been treated for nematodes or had a preservative put on it, that preservative can break down and migrate into your packaging material, which can ultimately give a bad aroma to the product. No health problems, but a bad aroma. But it took us a long time to figure this out. 7 years before we found that out, our pharmaceutical group had gone to metal and plastic pallets. Our consumer group didn't. We never would have had the problem if we had just shared across the organization. So it's very important we create an environment where people can talk and people can do some work and look at things. But if we told them what to do, it wouldn't work. So it has to be creating the environment and allowing people to get the cross-fertilization, and then the R&D council or the operations council or the other councils actually look across it and share people.
Time for one more question.
We have time for one more question, yeah.
Hello, my name is Constantinos.
We have two more. There's a lady in the back. Yeah.
My name is Constantinos. I'm a first-year MBA student. I would like your opinion on, as a CEO, how do you decide to what extent you're going to delegate responsibilities to your colleagues, and when you're going to take ownership of the task at hand, especially when in a crisis?
Well, as a CEO, you take ownership to everything. Okay? And if it's a crisis, as I said before, leadership really does have to step up. As far as delegation, I think you have to be comfortable delegating any task to anybody that works for you. If you're not, you have the wrong people working for you and you got to change them out. But I think you have to be comfortable with the people you have, and I've always believed that everybody I want working for me should be better than me because it makes me look better, right? Think about that. You know, there's so many people that say, I don't want to be threatened by the people that are working for me. So, you know, I want good people, but I don't want them too good. Or you can take the other approach and say, I want the best people I can find, and every one of them should be better than me, and that'll make me look better, right? So I think you, as a CEO, you have to take accountability for everything. Anything that goes wrong, stand up and say in a crisis, I'm taking it, I'm going to lead the change, and I'm going to fix it. You also can say, we had a great success here, and it's because of these people that did such an extraordinary job. But you have to have confidence in the people that work for you, and you have to feel comfortable delegating them. Now, in a real crisis, like we've had, you know, you need to have the right people around the table to help you make decisions. So do I have to lead and ultimately accept accountability for making that decision? Absolutely. But I guarantee you, I have my general counsel around the table, I have my vice chairman around the table, I have my CFO around the table, I've had our head of HR. We sit around the table and we work on it. And if you need experts, probably, I'm going to say 10 years ago, Propulsive, 10 years ago? 10 years ago, we had a product that was a phenomenal product that was overprescribed. And we had some reactions that came from it. And the FDA asked us to look at usage and other things. So we put together a group of people. By education, I'm a scientist, but I don't even pretend to be a scientist like scientists today. So we put a group together and said, okay, we need to answer these questions. And on that group were a bunch of scientists, a bunch of regulatory people, and a bunch of physicians. And I'd come in about once every 2 weeks, and I'd sit down and I'd say, okay, where are we? And I'd look each physician in the eye and I'd say, if it was someone that you loved or was close to you, would you prescribe this product? And they knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, if any one of them ever said no, we would have pulled that product off the market. What we did do is look at the ability to control the prescription. And this was a $1 billion product. And we found out that if you look at the East Coast of the United States, you have the retiree who goes to Florida in the winter and gets a prescription for erythromycin. And they go back up to New Jersey or New York in the summer, and they get a prescription for this product, Propulsive. And if you use the two of them together, it causes cardiac problems. As soon as we found we couldn't control that, which electronic medical records, if you guys kind of work on, can help, we took the product off the market. Because we could not control the potential risk that was created by these traveling prescriptions. But the point I'm making is you got to have the right people that have the expertise to be able to get around all of this. You've got to get the right data, and then you have to ultimately stand up and take the responsibility for the decision. Okay? There's one question in the back, and then we're done.
Thank you for giving me a chance. I'm Haley. I'm first-year MBA student, and I'm very interested when you talk about gray area. So could you share your story when you were in gray area? How did you approach the problem? How did you handle, and how did you stand in a tough situation?
Yeah, I'll share one, and it's not legal, but I was the managing director or president of the company in Korea, a pharmaceutical company. We had most of my career was in pharmaceuticals and then in medical devices. And we had a product that did about 50% of the volume of this company. There's a product called Zomax years ago that we ended up taking off the market. And when we took it off the market, I basically said, we're going to have to fire half of the company. And I had the board that was working for me there, which were all Korean nationals, coming in and threw the credo in my face and said, you don't practice it. I said, yeah, I do practice it, because either we eliminate half of the company today, or in a year we'll have to eliminate the whole company because we can't support it. So I think those are the type things where, where there's no easy answers, and you have to answer those questions, and that's where you do get guided by your credo. The most difficult questions you ever have to ask as a leader is, we have 120,000 families that J&J is responsible to, and during the economic crisis and during some of the challenges we had to close down some facilities and put people out of work. You want to talk about losing sleep when you're going to cut down, when you're going to have to eliminate 5,000 people? But if you don't eliminate that 5,000, then you've compromised the other 115,000. And it's not just the people, it's their families and everyone that it impacts. So, there's a lot of very difficult decisions you have to make, but you have to do them. And you have to be at peace with making those decisions, because they are for the betterment of the whole, and it's the same thing in this instance. And that's where you get into white and gray. Our second responsibility in our credo is to our employees. That doesn't mean you have a job for life. It doesn't mean if things are difficult that you don't have to eliminate some jobs. But it also says you have to treat everybody with dignity and respect. We worked in a company in Cincinnati that we started up, Ethicon Endosurgery, where the company was doing unbelievably well, extraordinarily well, but we built an infrastructure to support a $1 billion company. It was only about $500 million at the time. We went through and had to eliminate jobs, but we outplaced, I think it was 94 or 95% of the people that got laid off. So the thing that was really gut-wrenching is we had to lay them off, but the other side of it is we had to treat them with dignity and respect and try and make sure they ended up okay. So those are the type things you say. Great. Good luck with your career. It's been great to be here. Thank you very much.